A lot of people, including myself, always talk about how Persona games are pretty easy. In fact, I'd wager that in at least half of my videos, I mention at least once how Persona on average is an easy series. But that got me thinking, what actually are the hardest and easiest games relatively in the Persona series? It's easy to write off every game as simply being easy, but there has to be games that are harder than others, so that's what I wanted to explore in this video, ranking all of the games from easiest to hardest. This list will be assuming the player is on the hardest difficulty of each game, but to be honest, even if we go by normal or whatever else, it wouldn't change too much besides a few exceptions. This is very subjective considering something I find easy could be hard for other people and vice versa, but to try and make sense of some of my personal rankings, I'll value it based on a few different criteria. 1. How often do I find myself dying or struggling to win fights in each game? 2. How much do I need to use the game's mechanics to win? As an example, how often do I need to fuse new personas or interact with a mechanic like Theurgy to win? 3. How easy is it to break the game? Can someone who's never played a JRPG before make really overpowered builds, or is that going to be reserved for people who understand the game on a more technical level? I think those 3 categories will give us a solid foundation to determine which games are easier or harder than others. With all of this lined up, we can get this show on the road. The only thing I'll ask is that if you enjoy Persona and other games, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm always making new content for you guys to enjoy. Now, let's get into this. The first few games are basically impossible to rank by my criteria, so we're immediately throwing a wrench into things with the arena games and P5X. These games range from being so insanely easy to the point you can win every fight without even doing anything since they have auto battle, to being the hardest requiring actual professional fighting game experience for arena, or a hefty wallet to beat some of the more pay to win stuff in P5X. Despite the fact I have thousands of hours in arena, I could very well still lose every single match to a top level player in that game since I'm so out of practice, making it essentially as hard as any game can possibly be. For P5X, I was mostly free to play when I still played the game, so I'm not going to be able to get as high of a score as the whales of the game by design. It feels pretty cheap and anticlimactic to put these as the true hardest games in the Persona series though, since they go against the average game design so much, so I figured a special tier named easiest or hardest would be an apt place for them to go. The rest of the tiers will have much more detailed explanations, but I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory. Fighting games are one of the hardest genres to master, and P5X is a gacha game designed to squeeze every single dime out of you for those precious waifus. Not much more really needs to be said there. Going into games that can actually be talked about a lot are the games in the way too easy tier. The games in this tier are so easy to the point where you don't even really need to do anything to beat them. The 2 games here are Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona 3 Aigis the First Mission. Yep, I'm including the mobile games here, but I'm not going to go too in detail since they're pretty self-explanatory. So I'll start with Innocent Sin. For this game, I'm mostly going to refer to the PSP version, but from what I've played of the PS1 version, it is a little bit harder, but it's not too much different. This is the only game in the entire franchise I was able to beat without using the Velvet Room. Genuinely, the enemies do such little damage and you do so much damage to the point where using the Velvet Room is basically a waste of time, especially since you're given new personas through story progression that are more than enough to beat the game with. The only point in this entire game where I struggled at all was the final boss, because I was so underprepared because the game is so easy that the boss was doing a lot of damage, more than usual, and I didn't have many items. But even then, I still beat it, so it wasn't that hard. It sucks because the game has a lot of interesting ideas and mechanics like fusion spells that you never get to take full advantage of because the enemies die so fast that it doesn't feel like it's worth it. It's usually best to spam your standard persona skills and call it a day. This, on top of the way SP and HP worked in the older games, makes this game so mind-numbingly easy. If you aren't aware of how that works, there's a few layers to it. Basically, every couple steps or so you'll regenerate a small sum of HP and SP for free. But also, persona skills don't actually have individual cost. The cost is attached to the personas themselves, so the lower level personas use less SP and higher level personas use more. Pretty simple, but since the game is so easy like I keep saying, you could argue it's actually optimal to never fuse new personas since SP will quite literally never be an issue if you don't. I never once ran out of SP in this entire game, making the one and only thing that could have made it hard null and void. It's ridiculous. The gameplay loop of Innocent Sin can be boiled down to spam the same skills for 50 hours and call it a day. Aigis the First Mission is also like this, but that game is also a mobile game from 2007. A 3D run and gun type shooter at that, so the game had to be easy or it would be impossible to beat. You shoot the shadows with Aigis' guns and you profit, business as usual. Like I said, I'm not going to go super in detail for this game, but if you are interested in learning more about it, make sure to check the video popping up at the top right of the screen now. These are the only games that I think are outright way too easy. Even something like Reload has some moments where it's possible for a player to die if they don't make use of any mechanics, but not these games. You can ignore everything and win, making them easily the easiest games in the entire franchise. Now that we've got the absolute easiest games covered, the next tier are games that aren't quite that easy, but still lean on being almost too easy at times, hence the name of the tier being leans on too easy. Starting this one off is Persona 5 Tactica. For this being a tactics game, it is strangely very lenient on the player making bad decisions quite often. The gameplay loop of Tactica is a lot different than the others, being in a mission structure, which in itself makes it a bit more forgiving even if you do somehow mess up. The level design also makes it pretty simple to clear out all the enemies in a streamlined way since they aren't programmed to go outside of their designated areas or roles much at all. You can manipulate the AI super easily, which I guess makes sense for a tactics game, but it can make it feel kind of dull and easy at times. Worst comes to worst, you can just reset the map and do it again, whereas in a mainline game you'd have to at least reload the save or restart the boss fight. But you won't find yourself doing that often because even on a blind playthrough, it's pretty easy to 100% all the levels. The enemies don't do that much damage since you can hide behind a wall and they can't attack you while you can attack them, and most of the good skills for each party member come from their innate skills. Like Yusuke having auto Tsukukaja and Masukukaja, it just makes it so easy. Even though everyone can hold a second persona to make them better, I'm pretty confident you could beat the game without using that at all. I only recall one mission in the entire game I struggled on to get the awards. Beyond that, I never died once. The game is still very fun with a super underrated story, might I add, but difficulty-wise, it's certainly on the easy side. Still recommend the game though. Another game I recommend that is extremely easy is Persona 5 Royal. I was really debating on whether to put Reload or Royal as being harder. Spoiler alert, Reload will be coming soon, but I had to go with Royal because this game has so many absurd ways to make the game easy. Let's completely ignore the DLC aspect like Izanagi no Okami and talk about the game at its core. For one, there were several changes made to the game coming from the vanilla version that made the game way easier. You've got the mementos changes where you can change the cognition to give you more items, money, and XP, which completely breaks the progression system of the game. Then you've got Ryuji's insta-kill confidant ability, which makes the game so easy. In Royal, it was made insanely overpowered by letting you insta-kill shadows that are weaker than you while also getting all of the XP, money, and personas. That on top of the cognition system makes it so in one trip to mementos, you can accidentally overlevel yourself. Even if you don't do any of this, however, you've still got things like persona traits that make much of the very few things you could argue to be hard, null and void. Oh, you don't want to struggle with managing SP? Just get a persona trait that lowers the cost by upwards of 75%. Don't think you're doing enough damage somehow? Well, on top of being overleveled, take an extra 30% physical damage with no strings attached. And don't even get me started on how the Velvet Room works. Vanilla already had a very strong Velvet Room, but now there's a fusion alarm that makes it even better. You can get better items, personas, skills, stats, basically every metric can be improved. This on top of everything else once again makes you so absurdly overpowered, and it can all be done so easily you don't even have to try. I'm not gonna lie, the more I keep thinking about it, the more I remember how much easier they made the game. So in Vanilla, you had to unlock Baton Pass with each member by ranking up their confidant, but now they have it by default. Baton Pass also powers up with each pass, making you do even more damage. You can power up Baton Pass even more by playing darts with the characters as if it needed to be much better. You can take party members to the jazz club to get more broken skills, guns reload after every fight, technicals were added, dire shadows are easy to exploit. There are countless things that make this game even easier than Vanilla, but they didn't account for these things in the game balance. Vanilla was already pretty easy to get through, but all of these things and more make it ridiculously easy. The only fight most people struggle with is the spaceship boss, but beyond that, it's hard to make this game hard. It's still harder than Innocent Sin, believe it or not, but that's not saying much. You'd have to purposely neuter yourself by not using most of the mechanics to see any sort of difficulty even on the harder difficulties, making this by far and away the easiest mainline game in the past 15 years or so. Reload isn't far behind though, because this game is also very easy, and it's mostly because of one new mechanic: theurgy. In my opinion, the game is decently balanced before you unlock this. Still not quite as hard as the other versions like Fest or Portable, but something like the Priestess boss and early Tartarus trips can be quite tricky if you aren't adequately prepared. Once you hit June 13th and unlock Theurgies, however, any thought of balance with the dev team went right out the window. Theurgies completely break the game by giving you extremely powerful skills that cannot miss, cannot be blocked, or have really broken buffs. Koromaru's power charge is a party-wide charge that doubles your next physical attack, which results in annihilating the game from left, right, and center. You can one-shot every single enemy in the entire game if you set up Theurgies right, which takes the game from a fairly average difficulty where you do have to use a variety of skills, to a game where you just spam Theurgies and win instantly if you so choose. Theurgies don't even cost HP or SP either. You charge up the Theurgy gauge and can use them for free, which once again breaks the resource management aspect of these games. Not that it really matters, because Reload also has easy ways to get around resource management as well. Characters like Yukari and Ken have basically infinite SP with their passive skills, and since they're healers, they can always heal you for free. There's also the Twilight Fragment system where you can refill your HP and SP at the entrance of Tartarus. They hand out Twilight Fragments like candy in this game, so you'll basically never struggle for resources in this game. Then there's smaller things like the Ambush system where you can ambush every single enemy, including the Reaper, by doing a running attack on them, giving you an advantage in every single fight, meaning you'll kill most enemies before they get a single turn. Physical in this game is also the most broken it's ever been, with Junpei being an actual crit god with his passive and skills, things like crit rate amp existing, all physical types having boost and amp variants, and the protagonist having a really broken physical theurgy. Oh yeah, the game also has a shift mechanic which functions like baton pass, but I feel like this game was even less designed around that, since much of the enemy design is the same as the original, which didn't have this mechanic. Really, it's pretty easy for similar reasons as Royal, but not as many things stacked on top of each other as that game. There's no fusion alarm, no insta-kill, no cognition shifting, no persona traits, so that's why I think it's a little harder than Royal. But again, that's not saying that much. The end of this tier is going to be Persona 1. I debated on putting this game a little higher, but there are things that led to me not doing that. For one, I beat most of the game with very underleveled personas. All I did was spam Megiddo the entire game until the final boss, and then grinded a bit in the final dungeon for new personas and skills. The grid system of this game is pretty easily negated as well, albeit being pretty annoying at times. The grid system makes it so both you and your party can change formations. Your skills to accommodate for this won't always be able to hit all enemies, but if you get an AoE skill to hit all the grids anyways, then that entire dynamic of the game is flipped on its head, and some of the best skills in the game are AoE skills. Go figure. Since you'll need new personas to get new skills to make use of this system, you'll need to interact with the negotiation system, the worst part of the game by far. This system is also in Persona 2, but like I said, I never needed to use the Velvet Room. To get cards to fuse new personas, you need to negotiate with demons and get them to give you their card. Sounds simple enough, but it's also simple to say go play the Invincible Versus beta and not have someone rage quit against you every 2 matches.
Oh fuck no!
Doesn't mean it's actually gonna happen. This is where most of the difficulty comes from, I'm not even trolling. The amount of frustration this can cause is ridiculous, and it made me feel like I was losing my mind when I was trying to fuse some of these new personas. But once you get past that and get like 1 or 2 good personas, you can blitz through the game. Persona 1 has a couple spikes here and there that can make it tough, but on average it's not that hard, so I think it deserves to send out the leans onto easy tier. Oh yeah, the Persona 1 mobile game, Persona Anomalous Tower Chronicle, goes right alongside it, since it is quite literally the exact same combat formula down to the damage calculations. The only difference is that the dungeons, or dungeon more like, is designed like Persona 3's Tartarus. Need I say more? The next tier is kind of weird, similarly to the easiest or hardest tier, but they fall into a bit of a different category since they're different by design. Again. I'm talking about the Persona dancing games, hence the rhythm game Limbo title for this tier. Unlike P5X or the arena games, this game doesn't have anything like an auto battle to do the dances for you, and since we're assuming the player is on the hardest difficulty for this list, that would mean basing this off the all-night difficulty. The story modes only go up to normal difficulty though, so I really wasn't sure how or where to rank these games. Should I rank them based on the story mode, which doesn't exist for Persona 3 and 5 dancing, or should I rank it based on the free dance mode where most of the game time would be at? Ultimately, I decided to go with free dance since that allows you to access all of the songs and difficulties. This then begs the question of whether I should include modifiers, which can make it damn near impossible by making the notes literally invisible, but I decided to not overcomplicate it and just talk about the game at its core. Rhythm games inherently are either very easy or very hard depending on your experience with them, which you can argue for any genre of game, but I think it goes double for these games in particular. I grew up playing a bunch of rhythm games like Guitar Hero 3, so I had a fairly easy time adjusting to the way this game played. If this is your first rhythm game ever, however, then it might be damn near impossible to beat some of the songs on that all night difficulty. There isn't any objective way to rank these games like Royal, Reload, or even Tactica. I can't argue that X mechanic makes the game easier because there are no mechanics. It's the player versus these moving circles, and that's all there is to it. Since that's all there is to it, let's not waste time and get into where most of the games in this video reside. The average difficulty tier. Ooh, spooky. We're getting into some games that actually require some knowledge to beat. Kind of. I don't need to talk much about Persona 5 Vanilla since I've gone over the meat of it in the Persona 5 Royal section. This game is Royal, but without all of the insanely broken things like the fusion alarm or Persona traits. Shocking, right? It isn't like the game is still damn near the same game. It's still fairly easy, but there aren't as many failsafes for the player. No Memento's cognition and no Ryuji insta-kill alone makes the process of leveling up more natural, meaning you'll have to interact with the game at its core more often, which is nice. After Persona 5 is Persona 4 Golden, which honestly is almost the exact same difficulty as Persona 5 Vanilla in my opinion. The only major differences between the two games is that Persona 4 only has one physical affinity, whereas Persona 5 has strike and gun, and Persona 4 does not have a baton pass mechanic. Other than that, it's very similar. It has the same kind of passive skills, same sort of progression, but there is one thing that does make this slightly harder. Persona 5 has the hide feature, which lets you ambush shadows very easily, like it's brain dead easy. This game, however, does not have that, meaning it's a bit more likely for you to get ambushed by shadows, meaning you can die a little more often. Still not super likely since the game is very generous. Oh my god, bro, I cannot speak today. I've been recording this video across like 2 days now in various sessions. I'm going crazy, bro. Just please drop a like and a sub, y'all. Please, I'm trying so hard out here. The game is quite generous, but more likely nonetheless that you die. I do think Persona 4 has a few more difficulty spikes, however, like the Shadow Kanji fight can be quite difficult on a first playthrough. The Golden exclusive dungeon can also be tricky since it uses gimmicks that haven't been used ever since. But again, it's mostly the same difficulty as Persona 5. I will be talking about Persona 4 more in this video though, so trust me, if you want to hear more about Persona 4, don't worry, it's coming. Unsurprisingly, Persona 3 Portable, and you might be able to guess what I'm going to say here, has a fairly similar difficulty to Persona 4 Golden. See why this is the average difficulty tier? Once again, this game has a very similar gameplay loop as Persona 4 Golden. My main reason for putting this higher is because there's more mechanics at play that can be a hindrance to the player. You've got the tired mechanic for one, which can make early Tartarus visits very tedious since you'll have to leave quite early since your party members will become tired. The bosses and enemies are also just harder on average, including the super bosses, so yeah, that obviously adds to the difficulty. I don't want to continue being redundant saying the same things about these games, so I'm going to leave it there for Portable, which also wraps up the average difficulty tier. Shout out to FemT though, I hope you come back someday. Things get a bit interesting in this next tier I decided to call Can Be Very Challenging. The games in this tier, while not being impossible, will absolutely give you a hard time if you don't adequately prepare, making this in my opinion the sweet spot for Persona's balancing. Kicking things off is Persona 4 on the PlayStation 2. I'll be honest, I was going to put this lower, but then I was talking to some of my homies about it and remembered just how much easier Golden was made coming from this version. It might be just as dramatic as P5 Vanilla to Royal, if not more. There are a lot of things in place that make this game harder than Golden, like shuffle time working completely differently in this game. You know how in Golden there's like 20 something cards based on the Arcana and whatnot that give you a ton of extra things like more money, XP, and so on? Well, you know what Persona 4's shuffle time used to have? A persona. That's it. This isn't quite as extreme as Royal's cognition system, but my god, this makes the game way harder since there aren't as many options for getting broken. It also makes resource management harder since there aren't cards to refill your HP and SP. Since you'll be struggling for money a bit more, you also won't have as many funds to blow on items or equipment, which is one of the key things that makes Persona games easy if you opt to use them. Beyond even shuffle time though, there were changes made to bosses to make them easier as well. In Golden, Shadow Yukiko has a weakness to ice, but in Vanilla she has no weaknesses, meaning your options for attacking her are a lot lower. You know what else Vanilla Shadow Yukiko has that Golden doesn't? Mind Charge, Matarunda, and Assault Dive, and the cherry on top? You get less money for beating the bosses. Almost every boss in this version has something that makes them harder at a baseline, and this version doesn't have skill inheritance or skill cards, making it harder to make better personas for these harder fights. It's pretty insane when you look at all the changes from this version to Golden, cause on the surface it might seem about the same. But no, this version is like 5 times harder. Every aspect of the game got easier in Golden, making this easily worthy of starting off this tier of the tier list. Next up comes Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Once again, I'll mainly be referring to the PSP version, but in my experience, the PS1 version is pretty similar. Take all of the flaws I said about Innocent Sin's gameplay, remove them, and you've got Eternal Punishment. Not only is the game harder, requiring you to make use of all those mechanics, but dare I say, it's some of the most fun I've had with a Persona game. Since every character can use alternate personas in these games, that lends itself to giving the player a lot of options on how they want to build characters. Unfortunately, Persona 1 and Innocent Sin suffered from the problem of not having enough challenge built into the game to incentivize the average player to want to make use of all of the abilities. This game, however, I did feel that need for most of the game. I'd say at least every 2 dungeons or so, I'd completely change the personas I had equipped on every character, which means the game forced me to interact with the mechanics. On top of that, I found myself dying fairly regularly, and not because the game was bullshitting me with insta-kills like Hama or Muto or whatever, but because the game is actually a fairly decent challenge. If I failed to prepare properly for a boss, I would die until I got new personas, items, equipment, or a new strategy altogether, which I loved. I was using all the tools at my disposal to get through the game, so even though it's the exact same formula as Innocent Sin, it's just more fun and well thought out. The random encounter rate is a little egregious, but it's not as bad as it was in Innocent Sin since the battles were more engaging. The main reason this game isn't even higher on the list is because some things from Innocent Sin that did make the game a bit easier are still present, albeit not as bad, like the Persona SP cost system. Simply put, this game can be challenging to optimize and complete, making this, in my opinion, debatably the best balanced Persona game yet. The Persona Q games, on the other hand, are pretty tough to rank for me. At some points I think they can be hard, but at most points I think the game designers forgot how to make a game. By far the hardest part about this game is wanting to play it because it's so goddamn awful, so that alone puts it in this tier. Nah, I'm just joking, y'all, don't take it too serious. It goes in average difficulty between Golden and Portable. Had to do a little switcheroo on y'all, I can't make it that easy to guess where each game goes. No hate to people who like the game, I'm just joking, mostly. Persona Q1 in particular has like 5 different ways to break the game that a player can naturally come across. The way I beat this game was spamming Hama and Muto against every single enemy in the game because they didn't think about how broken these skills would be in the context of the game. Then you've got poison skills that completely break the FOE sub-bosses at the beginning of the game. Link skills, Hama and Muto, there's like infinite ways to break this game. From all I've played of Persona Q2, it seems about the same, but they actually did nerf Hama and Muto a little bit, so I guess that technically makes it harder? Technically? The game can be kind of hard with the FOEs, especially in the 4th Labyrinth since they're so fucking annoying in that one. That's the worst dungeon in the whole series, by the way. But if you're avoiding those fights as the game intends for you to do, then it isn't that bad. The main thing I do need to mention, however, is that the game can get vastly harder depending on what protagonist you choose to play. Since the Persona 3 protagonist is weak to dark even with the ultimate persona for some reason, if you're playing on the hardest difficulty, the game ends when the protagonist dies. That means if the protagonist gets hit by Muto once, you lose. This is the case in every Persona game, but it's extremely annoying in Persona Q. The Persona 4 protagonist, on the other hand, does not have this issue, so your mileage may vary, especially in the 3rd Labyrinth where the enemies will spam these skills like there's no tomorrow. I played the P4 side, so I found it to be a bit easier than someone who in P3 side might have. Overall, Persona Q can be a bit hard at times, but it's not that bad. The final game in this tier, and yes, this tier is unfortunately quite short, is Persona 3 FES. In my opinion, this is simultaneously the best and most frustrating Persona game difficulty-wise yet. The balance between physical and magic is great, there aren't any super overpowered mechanics like spell cards, just you and your team thugging it out through Tartarus trying to make it to the end. It's very similar to Persona 4 Vanilla's design and difficulty, but with one key difference that I'm sure you are all well familiar with: the tactic system. Even as someone who has grown to appreciate this system more over the years, it can still be frustrating to play around with because sometimes the AI won't do what you want them to do. If you put them on heal support and want them to buff you, sometimes they might heal instead, leaving it completely out of your hands. The tired mechanic from Portable is also here, unsurprisingly. It's almost like this is where that came from, which once again makes the early Tartarus visits feel like hell. And maybe this is just me, but I find myself struggling for money constantly in this game. Anytime I had the feeling of going to buy items or equipment, I would get to the shop and think, man, I really don't have enough money to do what I want here. Which isn't a bad thing, by the way, I think it's fine, but that adds to the difficulty. So FES doesn't have as many broken skills, it's quite hard to make really good personas, the bosses and enemies can be a big challenge, and the tactic system is either your best friend or your worst enemy. It's basically just Persona 4 Vanilla but without direct commands, but that makes it a lot harder, and for that, it's one of the hardest games in the series personally. So ladies and gents and anything in between, we have now reached the final game of this tier list, and this final game is going into the aptly named actual mean difficulty tier, where it's hilariously dumb at times. I'd wager to say most people haven't even tried getting past the first dungeon on this difficulty. What game am I referring to, you might ask? Well, it's none other than Persona 5 Strikers on Merciless difficulty. First things first, to even get access to this difficulty, you need to have completed the game once so you can start a new game plus save file. Once you do that, it'll prompt you to start a Merciless difficulty run. This is the worst mistake any player could possibly make, because this difficulty exists just to make people like myself, who think Persona is easy on average, want to bungee jump off the Eiffel Tower without the bungee cord, and this is for several reasons. Let's talk about the silver lining first, however. Everything besides request completion transfers from your main save. Your level, equipment, money, bond skills, everything is still intact. You also have access to all party members from the very start, which is a great addition. This should be in every Persona game. That's all for the silver linings, so what makes this difficulty so difficult? Well, let me just name a couple things to illustrate the point. Futaba hacking missions take longer and spawn more enemies. Enemies will notice you faster and are harder to ambush. Enemy affinities have been altered. You cannot reload from a checkpoint if you die. Treasure demons are more rare and are harder to kill. Security level raises faster in jails. Dire shadows infinitely return. You basically have to hit enemy weaknesses to break armor and do damage. And most importantly, you take a fucking ton of damage. Like seriously, even in the tutorial of the game, you will die in like one hit, even if you're level 99 with good personas. Like deadass, if you're able to get one shot in the tutorial, you can only imagine how like boss fights and super bosses go. It's to a point where I don't even have to say anything else. If you get one shot in the tutorial of the game, I don't need to explain anymore. That's just ridiculous. Despite how unfair this mode can be though, I have to give Atlas some props here. We as Persona fans asked for the games to be harder, and they delivered. They definitely delivered. That also delivers us to the end of this tier list. As I said at the start of the video, this list is very subjective, so things I found easy you might find hard and vice versa, but I hope I was able to give each game a decent explanation as to why I placed them where I did. Now that my tier list is done, what would your Persona difficulty tier list look like? Do you agree or disagree with my list? I'd love to know, since Persona difficulty can kinda be all over the place, and I know this will open a lot of fun discussion. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and a sub. It helps the channel out a lot, and I'll give you a free cookie as always. Here you go, homie. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, everybody, and have a great day.